Josephine, come on up here. Msgr Rossetti. Father Robert Spitzer.
Yes.
Hi, sister. Just sister's going to be joining us here. No, giving another talk here. All right, I'm going to moderate this thing. We're going to do a little panel here, all right? A little panel, question, answer. You know, I got to say this. I really have to say this. I think this was the best lineup of speakers we've ever had. I don't know.
Well, my mother would agree. What can I tell you?
I might get myself in trouble saying that, but you know, it was so much meat on the bone, right? There was just so much meat on the bone that was just really awesome to gnaw on. So that was awesome. All right, here's what we're going to do. It's just going to be kind of a conversation. I'm going to ask some questions, and you guys just give your best answers. How about that? All right, Msgr Rossetti, you're first.
Yeah. Is this a game show?
When or have you ever been scared in an exorcism?
I was asked that, what's the scariest thing I've ever done? And then one TV guy asked me, are you scared of anything? And my answer is yes. Turbulence on airplanes. You know, it's something about that when the plane starts to shake. I mean, I pray in an exorcism, but I don't pray nearly as fervently as I do on an airplane. I'm going, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Jesus, save me.
So when the devil says the plane's going down, you're
I don't know what it is. I mean, it just terrifies me. It's an unconscious thing. No, I mean, am I terrified in exorcisms? No, Jesus is Lord, you know. And when you throw the water on the demons, they scream. They're just a little, hold up the crucifix, they can't stand it. Just a little bit of the Lord and they just melt. So why should I be afraid of someone who has so little energy and power and anything? They're just no.
I love it.
But I want you to pray for my flight today at 3:45, not too much turbulence.
We'll do that,
Yeah.
of course. I like the turbulence. I think it's kind of fun, you know? No, I don't know. All right, Sister Josephine, I know you spoke a lot about your family last night. My wife loved your talk. She was streaming it from home with the kiddos. To young people right now that are really suffering in families, or maybe really struggling, they see their parents' marriage isn't that great, maybe a mom or a dad is addicted to something that they know, and they're just kind of floating. What would you say to them?
Say to young people?
Yeah.
I like to, when I'm with a young person who's suffering, I like to really honestly say less and give them room to talk. Let them know that I believe you, that I hear you. I'm super interested in what you have to say to me. So I think sometimes when we're before young people, we're so eager to educate them that we don't hear them. And so I think that's probably what I would say. And also that I understand suffering as a young person. Mine is not the same as yours. But I understand what it is to be in pain. And when you're young and in that kind of pain, it can feel like you're trapped because you are young and so dependent and need so much help. So it's just to say that I see you, I hear you, I understand, and that I'm happy to be with you and listen to you.
I mean, that's accompaniment, right?
Yeah.
What we've talked about. Father Spitzer, do you know English? Sorry.
I tried.
Father Spitzer, you once told me while we were having dinner at men's conference in California, I asked you, and I told everyone here, I said, what's the best argument you've encountered against the existence of God? Against the existence. Do you remember what your answer was?
Yeah, there can't be an argument
Right,
against the existence of God because there's only 3 methods to disprove anything, and none of them can apply to God. So you can't say that God's intrinsically contradictory. How can you say existence through itself does not exist? Well, existence through itself exists as a virtual tautology. So God is, of course, existence through itself. Every one of us is existence through that being. That's existence through itself. So I said, well, you can't get an intrinsic contradiction. God can't contradict anything which is finite, because in order to have a contradiction among finites, you need some boundaries. But if God is unrestricted, there's no boundary for our boundary to contradict. In other words, if you have a square circle you can say, well, that's a contradiction because the boundaries of square exclude the boundaries of circle in the same respect at the same place and time. But if God has no boundaries, he doesn't contradict anything. There's no way he can be contradicted by a finite thing. And finally, you can't disprove God empirically because after all, you know what that would take? You'd have to experience everything that there was to experience in this universe, beyond our universe, in the whole of all reality beyond our universe. Know that you have the capacity to experience everything and notice that he's not there. Well, all three of those methods are a big impossibility. It's a zero. And by the way, in my talk with Stephen Hawking way back when, 2010, it's very clear science can't disprove God. Impossible, because scientific evidence must come from observation. Observational evidence must come from within our universe. Now, how can you take evidence within our universe to disprove God, who is beyond our universe, if indeed he is God? Answer, you can't do it any more than the cartoon character can assemble all the evidence from the cartoon to disprove the cartoonist. Totally impossible. So, at the end of the day, you cannot rationally disprove God. I do not see how atheism could be a rational proposition. Impossible methodologically.
Make sense? Sister Josephine, you have two priests sitting next to you, one on your right, one on your left. There are several priests here, many. As a religious sister sitting there, what would your message be to priests today?
First of all, I want to say I feel like I'm on a game show. The first thing, I just met a young priest from this diocese, and he reminded me of something that had come up in my prayer that I shared in a talk previously. It was just my view of the priest, particularly the diocesan priest, as rooted in a land and under the governance of a local ordinary. And so my hope is that our priests remain deeply rooted in the land that Christ has called them to, because it's that land and that place where they receive nourishment to bear the fruits of the ministerial priesthood. I love priests very much, and as I shared last night, being able to work with the priest in my diocese just caused them to take up permanent residency in my heart. And so I just want priests to know that I pray for you. I think that you are beautiful. Your vocation is beautiful. I know that what you're doing is not always easy, and I know that these are times where it's not easy to say yes to the priesthood, but reach down deep into the land that you have been placed in according to God's will, and you'll receive the nourishment that you need.
Very good. Thank you, sister. All right, Monsignor, you have extensive background, of course, in psychology. And I think it might surprise people to know the extensive kind of work that you do with people before to really kind of examine whether there's demonic possession taking place. How do you do that? How do you differentiate between psychology, maybe psychological defects, and actual demonic possession?
It's a common question, and I do teach it to new exorcists. It does help being a psychologist because you do know what mental illness looks like. And a demonic possession is very different, really. When a demon fills the room, I mean, for example, we have people who have major mental illnesses, and when we do our discernment, sometimes they'll do their best imitation of a possessed person. They'll scream and yell. But it's not the same thing. When demons are present, there is this evil in the room which is quite striking and unsettling. It's just a discernment. The Lord helps us. I tell young exorcists, don't be too worried about it. You'll figure it out. The Lord, the Holy Spirit will guide you, and eventually you'll know what the problem is.
Thank you, Monsignor. Yeah. And when crosses start flying off the wall, that's kind of a telltale.
Yeah, they'll do it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
They start levitating, that's a
They
real
start
sign.
levitating, that's a good indication, right? Man, I'd be out of there so quick. All right, Father Spitzer, Father Spitzer, you talk about faith and reason. John Paul II, fides et ratio, right? The two wings of the human person. What is faith and what is reason? And how do they coexist together?
Well, first of all, Aquinas said right from the get-go they couldn't contradict one another because they come from the same source, namely God. Now, just looking at it for a moment, of course, reason, I think we have probably all had some course in critical thinking, and you can, obviously there's a priori evidence, there's a posteriori evidence. A priori evidence comes from the principle of non-contradiction, logic and mathematics, and any semblance of trying to assemble the relationship among ideas in a consistent fashion. A posteriori evidence comes from the world of experience, but that includes the whole domain of science and measurement and testing, experimentation, etc. When you put all of these methodologies together, basically you get a means of extending human knowledge, extending it into realms that wouldn't just appear empirically or wouldn't be perfectly obvious. So mathematics takes, of course, the use of reasoning to extend human knowledge. And then the application of mathematics to measurement and science it produces an extension. So reason then we can just describe as the attempt to assemble data so that we can extend human knowledge by means of measurement, by means of mathematics, by means of empirical deduction, by means of a variety of other methodologies, and that includes interior ones too, phenomenological methods and psychological methods that try to extend human knowledge as best we can, but always, and what reason is trying to do, is not rely merely on subjective opinion. There has to be a reason given. There has to be an objective base at the end of the day upon which we can rely. So we can say, oh, the evidence for this is this. And there's public corroboration. So when somebody says, yes, indeed, a squared plus b squared must equal c squared, otherwise you're going to violate these axioms. And if you hold those axioms true, you must hold this true. So everybody can see it. Everybody can see, except me, what's going on in this room. So, I mean, the main thing is, pretty much, so long as you have public corroborational base, you have methodologies that people agree will allow you to objectively move from one premise to another in a fashion that is consistent with public corroboration, you got reason. Now, faith is a very different matter, because faith, of course, is based on several different things, which winds up being a matter of the will. But faith includes a lot of things from the beginning. So I'm not just going to reduce myself to objective evidence. So, I mean, when I give a shroud talk today, yes, I'm talking about objective evidence. I'm talking about rational, scientific, and logical methods that can be applied to it. And that's a proper sphere. But faith, if I want to believe, that God is good, or I want to believe not only that God exists, but he leads me, he's providentially interested in me, he's inspiring me, guiding me, protecting me, that he redeems my suffering. All of these things about the who of God, and even the existence of that kind of interested, subjective, interpersonal God, is going to require, as it were, an act of the will, a decision, a choice from me to want to believe. Now, why is that? Because, of course, that kind of faith is a relationship. It's relational in orientation. And I've got to answer some questions for myself. Do I want a relationship with a moral agency who's more powerful than me? Do I want a relationship with a moral agency who could make demands of me? And so forth and so on. So, like I said, if you say no to those two questions, wild horses will not drag you to the point. You could have the Aquinas' proof for God. You could have Gödel's proof for God. You could have a Hilbertian proof of God. You could have the scientific evidence for God. Wild horses would not drag you into a belief in God, because you don't want to believe in that God. And of course, I will never convince you. You'll find something And this is a disturbing fact to me. But there's 1 in 100 billion chance that this is a true proposition. Nevertheless, it prevents me from believing. Well, there's a reason for that. God made us free to want him. God made us free to want him in our lives, to want to hear his moral counsel, to want to follow his voice in our conscience. God makes us free so that we're not compelled to love him, but that we will want to throw ourselves into his arms, because we know that in the midst of all of that moral wisdom, his love is pervasive. We recognize his loving hand. And some people, they don't see that. They basically see, sometimes they think the dark hand, bowing here to Msgr Rossetti, is going to make them happy. They think that, if I just get whatever I will, if I can be a Nietzschean Übermensch, I'll be very happy, and so forth. I'll get my will, I'll get my way, and power is what I lust for. Vanity is what needs to be gratified. If I have all of that, I will not need much more except the world. And of course, if that you go for that temptation, all I can say is, get ready, because the master behind the throne will not love you. He will tempt you as far as he can and then kill you. And so that's, at the end of the day, we have to pick God. And so choice is the difference.
Amen. Sister, and not just for young people, but for all of us, right? There's a difference between thinking about becoming a priest, thinking about becoming a sister, and truly discerning becoming a priest and a sister. What does discernment mean to you?
Discernment, my experience of discernment, when I was coming to it, I made the error of making it only about, is God calling me to be a sister or not? And what was really wonderful is, as I moved towards discerning that, it really became a revelation for me that discernment is something we bring to all of our life, not just this little corner or this little pocket, but discernment should permeate our whole life and be a part of our ongoing formation as we grow up to discern. And so when we come to this major discernment, it's not foreign to us. So that's the first thing I would say is I would love if we could foster, more so than fostering a culture of vocations, foster a culture of discernment of God's presence, profound presence in each aspect of our lives. And so then when it comes time for this more major discernment, we are already in this relationship with God and have a sense of his voice. And I just told a young man backstage too, he's a seminarian, and I said, listen, there's no such thing as wasted time in the seminary, so if you discern that God is calling you to be a priest, wonderful. If you discern that God is not calling you to be a priest, also wonderful. It's a win-win. And so to really take time to hear God in this way is not wasted time. Mm-hmm. And then also the last thing I would say about discernment is I think sometimes, particularly young women, I spend more time with discerning young women, we can imagine that God is playing hide and seek or playing games with us, but we have one of our sisters, and it's a hard thing that she says, if you really think about it. She'll say, the will of God is what's happening. And so God's not playing hide and seek with us. His will is here, and we need to kind of discern what of it is permissive, what of it is active, how is he calling me? But to discern and perceive God's voice is not like an Easter egg hunt. It's more likened to being in water and perceiving the water.
That's a great analogy. Wow. All right. All right, Monsignor, you alluded to this a lot, right? That there are different gradations of demonic possession. Weaker demons, and then you've got Lucifer. You've seen them all, right? Can you kind of explain that out a little bit? Because I think sometimes we just think it's just the devil that's manifesting himself in this person, but it's not always the case. There's a lot of demons.
Well, first, all of us are affected by Satan's, what we call ordinary work, which is temptations. And I talked a little about the demonic messages it puts in our head that we'll call demon brain yesterday. So we're all affected by that a little bit. But there are what we call Satan's extraordinary work. And at one extreme is the possession. But most people who come to us are not fully possessed, but they may have some demonic stuff in their lives, some real sort of demonic torments, tortures, some real sort of... one of the ways of knowing this is, for example, all of us have temptations against purity, even when you're 73 years old. So, so we all have some, right? But when here's the normal level, but all of a sudden, boom, it goes way up there. You're overwhelmed by this whole thing. You go, where did that come from? Could be demonic. You see, so this lesser form of Satan's presence is much more common and happens a lot more than people realize. And that's when we do deliverance prayers. So use the prayers on our app, pray the rosary, of course, go to Mass and Confession, the normal means of dealing with Satan's more typical attacks that we all experience in some way, usually.
Thank you, Monsignor. Very good. Father Spitzer, you've talked about your blindness before, and you've talked about how it really has been a suffering for you in your life as well. Can you talk about that?
Well, blindness is a mixed blessing, as all challenges are that we have in our life. You know, I just was listening to some people when I was signing books who have some very major challenges in their lives. But just relate my own experience. You know, when you get the news that something's going to go wrong, and when I was 31, I did get the news that I had RP, retinitis pigmentosa, and that eventually by the time I was about 65, I would go blind. And, you know, I'm a scholar. I read a lot. I write a lot. I have to look at equations. I have to look at logical formulae. And as such, you know, I got a headache. I mean, the very thought of it was like, oh my gosh, you know, this is going to change my life. And, you know, I was just looking at it so negatively, and I was just wondering, oh my gosh, what does God want from me? I must be that. This all happened, by the way, 6 months before my ordination. So, of course, being an idiot, I think to myself, maybe God doesn't want me to be ordained. Well, luckily, you know, he's kind of telling me, you know, get out of the business. You're going to lose your driver's license. You can't have people driving you around. You can't. So, you know, I'll just sum up the story fast. I'm walking down the corridor as I'm seeing these specialists for my eyes back in my province, and I run into my provincial. Bob Spitzer, what are you doing here? I said, well, you know, I got this eye problem. I had to come back from Rome. He goes, well, you want to come in my office and talk about it? I said, yeah, I do. I want to discern this thing. Sorry, sister. But I want to discern this thing. And so he says, okay, come on in, you know. So I'm giving him my speech. Tom, I'm damaged goods. I don't know what you're going to do with me. You know, I can totally understand if you think I need to move on here from the society, from the priesthood. I can't imagine what God could have in mind if I go blind eventually, and so forth and so on. And I couldn't imagine I'd become a university president or write 18 books or something. It was just not there. You know, and all I could, you know, what were the possibilities for God? I didn't know. But anyway, I'm giving him this talk. And finally he sits there and he looks at me and he goes, Bob, what spirit have you been listening to? He did. Yes. And I just said, oh. And so looked like God could do something with me after all. So I've had 32 wonderful years in ministry as a priest, and, you know, and I've been blessed by it. Very much blessed by it. It makes you humble, and humility, as St. Paul said, is good. Yeah. So
it's amazing. In the day in which we're in, God just takes care of his church. He sends us priests like Father, you know, to really help us, especially in these days, these very days. Sister Josephine, how do you handle spiritual dryness or doubt?
First, before I answer that, dryness or doubt, I want to tell Monsignor, I was in the shuttle yesterday with some ladies, and they said they were going to Scottish Rite. I said, okay, I'm not from here. And then we dropped them off, and we rolled by, and it was a Masonic Center. And I was, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. Yeah. So I didn't realize it was right here on the block. Okay, so spiritual dryness and
doubt.
And doubt. I don't know if I grew up Baptist, and so I grew up in a context where everything was for conversation with God. And I grew up around really deeply prayerful women, and so I don't know if I'm the right person to answer the question. They really influenced me in the sense that my relationship with God, with Jesus, is not circumstantial. So if I'm dry, he's there with me dry. If I'm doubting, he's there with me in this doubt. I just really grew up around women who prayed that way. When they were suffering, they prayed more. You know, they shouted to the Lord. They just had this really rich prayer and this really rich conversation with God. I sometimes will tell people I feel like my experience of prayer is not this holy hour, that holy hour, this one, but it all in the end is going to be one long conversation I've had with the Lord in all things. And so when I hear doubt or dryness, and God, with God. And so I wouldn't say it's this special prayer or that special prayer. Just remain with him because he's remaining with you. He can't do anything else but remain with us.
Beautiful. Thank you, sister. Do the demons recognize you, Monsignor?
Recognize what?
Do they recognize you? Oh, it's him again. Do they know who you are? Yeah, when you go in.
Oh, yeah.
They do?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they got your name. Yeah, and know a lot about me. As I told them just like 10 days ago, in the end of a session, the demons, I told people this, they called me by my nickname in high school, which no one knows. That's a long time ago, by the way. No one knows it. They just want to know that we know who you are. We've been following you, and we got your number. Like I should be afraid. I said, well, Jesus is, remember, what's pillow number 1? Jesus is Lord. And then when they threaten me, pillow number 2? Jesus, I trust in you. So I say, fine, you know my nickname, big deal. You know, so yeah, they and actually, as Father Gabriel Morth said, the famous exorcist who's gone to the Lord, he said the demons are afraid of me. And it's true. The demons are terrified of Jesus, they're terrified of his church, and they're terrified of all of us who are baptized in his name, but also, especially for exorcist priests, are terrified. When I ask a person, one of the signs of discernment, we're not sure, we say, when you're coming to the church to see me, how are you feeling? If they say, I'm terrified, we say, okay, yeah, probably demonic. The demons are terrified of an exorcist, they're terrified of Jesus.
Wow. Thank you, Monsignor. Father Spitzer, you know the way life goes with people. Tragedy can unfold, suffering, and they oftentimes can doubt, or maybe even lose their faith. What is the proof of the existence of God through that? How do you battle that against the argument that there can't be a God because of suffering or what's happening in my life? He would never allow such a thing.
Well, it really differs from person to person. There's people are so different. I'll just break it down into 3 personalities. I call them the action type, the analytical type, and the affective type, the 3 A's. If I were working with somebody who was an analytical type, the first thing I would do, because I know me, and I'm an analytical type, first thing I'd say is, that doesn't make any sense, and by saying this, you are contradicting X, Y, and Z, and here's some evidence you ought to look at before you make an illogical statement like that. And you'd say, well, he's not going to, an analytical will take that bait like there is. I am not kidding you. That's the worm in the fish's mouth. You call me illogical? Yes. You look at the evidence. This is overwhelming evidence for God, and you can give him something. I mean, honestly, near-death experiences, I just know. I've used that thing, and I said, well, go ahead and refute it. Because now the New York Academy of Sciences actually has given this a very credible possibility based on 17 peer-reviewed studies. And, of course, the analytical type will say, okay, well, I didn't mean God didn't exist. Well, what did you mean? You know, well, he doesn't care about me. Now we can get to, something else. And I would do the Ignatian method if he said God didn't care about me, which is go back in your life and look at your life history. Are you kidding me? You're going to discount all those God incidences in your life? So with the analytics, I hate to say it, but I'm a little rougher than I would be with the action-oriented types and the affective-oriented types, because truly, you kind of have to go back to their base, and their base is evidence and logic, and start there and try to get them back on the road again. And everybody is, my mom is an affective. And I love my mother dearly. Yesterday was her birthday. And, I got to tell you, my mom just would say to me, why? When I was a student in college, why are you always looking for proof? And what do all these physics equations mean anyway? Just hold a baby and you'll know it's a miracle and God exists. So I'm holding I know.
That's faith. That's faith.
That's baby.
That's my mom, and I say, Mom, I'm holding the baby. It's not working, And but I got her wavelength because my mom knew a lot of things I didn't know intuitively. Because for like the first 30 years of my life, I shut off my intuition. But now that I've let it run, I see what a powerful thing it is, and how powerful my mom's insight was. And, she worked, basically on, looking at, love in her life. And so if I were working with an affective, I wouldn't stay on the level of feelings. I would stay, with the thought of what is love. And, to take a look at those instances in my life where I have been concretely loved, and begin with that. Because feelings are deceptive. And even though affectives like feelings, and they will tend to move with the heart, just like the action guy will move with the gut and the analytical person moves with the brain. Doesn't mean the analytical guy is smarter than the person with the heart, or that the guy who moves from the heart doesn't, have a brain or whatever. It just means that's their primary motivational, that's what they turn to, when they want to be motivated to do something. One guy's going to think about it, one guy's going to listen to their feelings, another guy's going to listen from the gut, and just what's the right thing to do. So with that, I would say I would try to keep the idea on, first of all, again, the Ignatian method. How has Christ loved you in your life? How have people loved you in your life? Do you think that's a pure coincidence? Let's take a look at the scriptures and see how God really loves us. And let's get the right definition of God. For the affective, you have got to turn off the prospect of the disgusted God, the terrifying God, the hateful, vengeful God, the retributive God, the God who basically is, a stoic, Spitzer, heaven, hell for you, and just in a complete stoic indifference. You got to shut those things down. Once you orient them toward the right notion of God, they've got a very good chance of, I think, listening to how God can work through this suffering and to give them the hope they need in their suffering. And the prodigal son is the best way to do it. The father of the prodigal son, just keep insisting that that's God, and these other gods, disgusting God, terrifying God, stoic God, retributive God, the payback God, not the real God. If you get that there, and then we can go right into the matter of how can God, this God who loves you, how's he likely to work with you? And so that is, an affective means. I've used this with many affectives, I think, beautifully. With the action person wants to know the right thing to do. They are motivated by the good. At the end of the day, they're good people, and they want to do good things, unless, of course, they're motivated by some of Monsignor's little demonic influence. But normally, a good person who's looking for a virtuous thing and a good cause, my thing is, you got a lot to do with your life, and no pity parties from you, Mr. Action guy. You got a lot of things to do with your life. Now, you can do a lot when you're blind, and so I use myself as the example, and that's the best way for me to do it, because I just say, well, I didn't think I could, I was writing off a whole lot of things. But look at what God does. He opens up this door of opportunity. Then you meet these people, and then somebody says, hey, I'll help you subsidize your ministry over here. And this other guy says, hey, can you use some brainiacs here to work on a couple of things with your faith and science thing? The next thing you know, you got a whole operation going, and you go, how'd the blind guy do it? The blind guy didn't do it. God did it through the blind guy. And so, I mean, but if you can convince him of that logic, it'll work.
Awesome. Sister, Monsignor, 30 seconds each. Sister, the one devotion that you really encourage people either to learn about or to embrace coming out of here. The one devotion in the church.
Confession. Just go frequently. It's not just for priests and religious to go every 2 weeks, every month. Go to confession. I want us to be a church that participates in the sacrament of reconciliation more.
Awesome. Monsignor?
The one thing I mentioned to seminarians and young priests is the one thing I really want you to do, I want you to grab onto Mary's mantle and never let go. She'll take care of you. She'll take care of your life. So grab on and never let go.
That's awesome. Let's thank our panel up here for their great work and faith. God bless you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you.